My name's Meghan Henshaw. I'm an herbalist in the city, and I've had the pleasure of working with the Lloyd collections now for over a decade in lots of different capacities, and so I'll kind of talk about my firsthand experience with that. But the intention of this class is really to give you all information about how you can utilize the library, both if you live in town and also if you're further afield. It's an incredible resource, which I hope has everybody been able to get over to the Lloyd and poke around a little bit. Yeah, great, awesome, yeah. So I'm going to just be sharing some tips for the researching herbalist, and yeah, we'll delve into a couple of the projects that I've worked on at the Lloyd over the years and how the collections have really benefited. Yeah, the greater herb world, my professional life, and my personal brain, of course, because it's a really fascinating place to spend time. So to give us a sense of where we're going, I've got a little outline here. So we're going to go into background, so my professional background, as well as a little bit of personal information. And the Lloyd Library introduction, you all are going to be familiar with this, but I just want to summarize it and kind of point out the things that stand out to me personally. And then using the library, so finding treasures. How do you go about finding treasures? I think that that's probably the main question for people. You know, we recognize that it's an incredible resource, but like, how do we dig in? And then I'll go into some best practices, both for in-person as well as online research, and potential uses for herbalists. Like, you'll get a sense that the information I share here, the images that I share of the books, it's like a tiny little smidgen. It's like a little scratch, an iota of the books that are in the collection and how cool they are. I mean, because I'm a current fellow, I have the ability to go into the stacks, and it's like you can disappear for hours because you find something and then that leads you to something else, and then you start looking at book covers, and then you find yourself in the kids section and you're like, oh my God, it's 3 hours later, what's going on? And then I'm going to talk about the Lloyd Fellowship programs because they are an incredible resource for you all and your botanical dream projects. It can be a way to make it happen. And then I'll go into my current botanical dream project, which is working on this herbal zine with a local artist here in town. So a little bit of personal connection to the Lloyd and this area. So my last name is Henshaw, and I come from a long line of furniture makers. And the Henshaw Furniture Factory was, as the crow flies, about 2 seconds right over there. There was a couple of different factories, but one was at Central and Elm. So if you walk down Elm, which is the street right in front of Memorial Hall where we are, and you cross over if you're going to the Lloyd Library, that is the intersection right there. So you can see right here, there's the Henshaw Furniture Factory, the sign down here. And then this also is a really cool image because we're familiar with this stage of Central Parkway. But before that, it was an open canal. So this was really crucial for, somebody like my ancestors that had, a trade where they needed to bring in a lot of like big raw material. So they would use the canals to float the materials to the factories, as well as, float those products away sometimes to further afield. So yeah, we came here in the 1840s, and I'm happy to be back. I moved back kind of begrudgingly in 2020, and I've been just really surprised by how interested the city is in herbal medicine. And a big piece of my excitement for moving back, aside from being closer to family, was really being able to utilize the Lloyd Library on a regular basis. So I'm an educator that's based here, and like I mentioned, I'm one of the current Curtis Gates Fellows. And my educational background is really mixed, super eclectic, in that I really started studying herbs in a more formal fashion through a farm internship with Herb Farm. That happened in my early 20s. I moved out to the farm. I lived in the intern house, and basically, I picked rocks in the field in exchange for working with like Rich Ochek and like Deborah Francis and all these incredible practitioners and growers that are in that valley. And then I went on to Bastyr University and did my BS in herbal science there, and then I did my master's in ethnobotany at the University of Canterbury over in England. And my business is Okatu Herbals, which can seem like kind of an odd combo since we are deep in the Midwest, but I spent 15 years in Santa Fe, New Mexico, and the desert is a really big part of my life still, even though I'm here in the Ohio River Valley. So I've worked on a wide range of writing and editing projects for a lot of different organizations as well as individuals. So I was a ghostwriter for the Herbarium with Herbal Academy, and specifically worked on UPS at-risk monographs. That's my personal passion, really. I worked as a herb clips editor for the American Botanical Council for 5 years. I was an editor with the Journal of Herbal Medicine that is published through Elsevier over in London. And I've really gotten to work with herbal businesses of all different sizes. And I've used the Lloyd collections in pretty much all of those projects, including working for independent researchers. And it was a huge professional benefit to be able to, be in meetings with folks and have questions that came up, and then to just say, well, I'm gonna email the Lloyd, or I'm gonna go down there next week and I'll get back to you. And for folks that are in that realm of things, it's a huge gift to be able to have somebody that can go and do the physical research there. So just as a refresher, Lloyd Library was started by 3 pharmacist brothers, and those brothers all manufactured botanical drugs sometimes directly, sometimes indirectly, because they all had different roles in the business. Holds a vast collection of books on pharmacy and botany, natural history, medicine, agriculture, fungi, and so much more. We were looking at a book about creatures, beasts, like 4-legged and winged the other day, and there are definitely creatures in there that didn't actually exist. So there's so much beyond just the plant and natural science world. So it's a privately funded library and museum, but it's open to the public. It's mostly private stacks, so you got a sense, you walking through, that there are amazing books that you can pull off the shelves, books that are cost prohibitive for individual herbalists to own sometimes. They're $300, $400, $500 a piece. But you can go in and pull off, Wendy Applequist's, botanical identification for herbs in commerce. That's totally out of print, and it's just there for you to use in whatever project that you're working on. But because it's all private stacks, it kind of changes the library experience. For me, I worked in a library, and I would discover so much by just kind of accidentally stumbling upon it. You're looking for one book, and then all of a sudden you're like, whoa, what is this section? I didn't even know this existed, And then you go down a whole other rabbit hole. So it's a different experience with having private stacks, and how do you utilize that? Well, you have to use the online catalog, which is a skill that everyone can learn. So some books are digitized, but it's less than 1%, so that really means that you've got to use that online catalog. There's art exhibits and public talks, and they really emphasize bringing herbal gems and information out of the dark, right? And I think in the past 5-10 years, I've really observed that the Lloyd has majorly stepped up their exhibitions, and it's really cool. So we had the 21-year cicadas that happened here just a few years ago, and they had an entomologist that came. They had this whole exhibit of these books that were all around cicadas, and it was so, geographically specific, because Cincinnati was literally the epicenter. It was like a cacophony of noise outside all the time, but it was really cool to be able to see, wow, here are these books that are talking about the same hatching of cicadas on this cyclical basis, and these books are right here in the Lloyd, and they're talking about this insect that's here once again. It's just that reminder that we are all this part of history, and things just keep repeating themselves. So here's some notable past exhibits that I think are just kind of stand out. standout exhibits of the collections. So through the RX bottle, medicinal cannabis, 1841 to 1937, really emphasized kind of the history of using cannabis within a medical context. And there's a lot of cool visuals that went along with that. The Gift of Wonder, a history of nature books for children. These books are a joy to explore. I mean, they are so gorgeous and really educational because, you know, these children's books were created at a time in which they were seeking to educate children about the natural world in really practical and interesting ways, you know, ways that would maybe be a little bit more radical now, finding that in children's books, but back then you're like, oh yeah, of course, you know, folks were just really connected to the land in a different kind of way, and, you know, these children's books like helped these kids to be, you know, to be like active members of like more farming communities, you know, folks that were engaged in that way. On the Wing, an illustrated chapter of birds, that's by Shay Warnick. So Shay is an ornithologist and she's a twin, and her twin did some interesting work in the birding field, and Shay pulled out a lot of really cool books that looked at specifically the birds. And then Rooted in Death, Growing in Grief, that's by Cole Imperi. She's a fascinating, like just human as well as professional. So she is a thanatologist, so that is a person that studies grief and death. And she studied plants and ethnobotany in relation to grief and death using the collections from the Lloyd. She has some TED Talks. If you have some time, it's definitely worth exploring. She lived just across the river and then she moved out to LA. So yeah, she loves the Lloyd. And then the Botanical Color Line and Slave Societies by Mark Harris, who's a local UC professor. You might have seen some of his video excerpts that are at the Lloyd currently, but he is also a fellow and he's been having kind of ongoing programming, really delving into the specifics of, you know, how enslaved folks their knowledge really built what we know in the colonial files, you know, of how to categorize certain plants, how to organize them, how to identify them. You know, that information was the result of, you know, deep knowledge of enslaved folks that did not get any kind of recognition. So he goes into that in his work. So library use. So this is probably the least exciting of all the slides that I'll show, but it's the most useful. This is the Lloyd Library catalog. So if you're on the web page, if you're on the homepage, and then you can just click on the catalog and then this is gonna pop up. So, you know, some people get really deep into like Boolean search terms, and you can, you know, watch YouTube videos about how to, you know, utilize those terms and use different parentheses and whatnot. But I would say just start with title, or even better, subject. If you're interested in mulberry, like do a search for mulberry. Just see what pops up. And then maybe start thinking about what's the Latin name of the plant that I'm most interested in, and then plug that in. If you come across some authors in your own studies and you find that, you know, oh, well, this person, they work at the University of North Carolina and they've been looking at American ginseng. So like do a search for their name and see what pops up. And it's just, you know, like anything, you're just doing some sleuthing, you're following some crumbs. You know, you might just need to spend some time to block it out in your schedule and, you know, set a timer and turn off all of your distractions as much as you can and just play around, poke around in here and see what you can find.
Do you have any tips for advanced searches, like anything you found that helps get more specific?
Yeah, I'll go into a little bit of that. Yeah, for sure. So I would say, you know, these are the tips that are the most important for in-person library use. So you want to create a list of about 10 to 15 books to explore. And you can email your book list to contact@lloydlibrary.org. So that is a general email inbox. So there's different librarians that specialize in different things that are at the Lloyd. Their understanding and just their mapping of the books that are there is incredible. They are just as rich of a resource as the actual text because they know where to find things. You can mention very obscure stuff and they're like, oh, yeah, hold on. And they'll just go and get it for you, if you're there in person. But, if you email them ahead of time, you just want to really give them a general idea of what your project is. Say you're looking at American ginseng and fungal infections involving American ginseng. So you would put a little project summary like, hi, I'm so-and-so. This is kind of the scope of what I'm interested in. I've been paying attention to these authors or these texts. And then you want to demonstrate that you've put in the effort with poking around in the catalog. It doesn't mean that you have to know exactly what you want, like to the fullest extent, but you want to be able to demonstrate that you've spent some time, you've done your due diligence to explore what's there. And if you have questions, if you run into roadblocks, if you're like, I did some basic searches and then I kind of just stalled out. I got these 10 books, what do I do next? That is totally fine. So include your project summary and then schedule a time to come in. So the librarians will pull the books for you. And the first time that ever happened, it was a really fun experience because you just feel like a library royalty, because you come in and you sign your name because you're a researcher that's visiting, and then they've already pulled your books for you and they roll out this cart, and on the cart they have all these different tools, for you to be able to utilize these books. If they're older books, I think it's before 1830, then you need to be in kind of the main area. If they're more recent ones, then sometimes there's a little bit more flexibility on which tables that you can work at. It really gets into the nitty gritty. But basically they roll out this cart, and it has book a book cushion on it, like a little pillow, and book weights. And I'll show you an image of what that looks like, because it's like anything, like doing research in these kinds of libraries. There's certain things that you just have to know the rules for, and it makes everything a bit easier. So the librarians will pull the books out for you, and then you can just plan to spend a few hours if you have a smaller project, or if you want to take a bazillion photos, then that also could maximize a small amount of time, or you could really set aside a few days. So, because I, grew up in Cincinnati and I started using these collections when I was living in New Mexico, I would kind of use it as an opportunity when I would come back for the holidays, where I would have a project. I would email the librarians ahead of time, tell them, my scope, and pull, ask for a certain number of books for them to pull. And then I would set aside, 2 days to come in and just look at the books. You always want to ask the librarians if they can think of other relevant texts. Like I mentioned before, they're incredible, rich, just repositories of interesting facts and information, and they often will lead you to things that you never would have found on your own. And I'll talk about an instance where that was extremely helpful for me in a minute here. So you want to make notes and you want to take photos. So pro tip, this is huge. This will save you a lot of time, is you want to take a photo of the cover of each book and then the pages for easy reference. So even another bonus level of this pro tip is that you take a photo of the title page. That's going to give you publisher information, the year that it was published, the actual publisher itself. Sometimes, it will say Cobb's Silk Manual, but then on the title page, there's a whole other sections of what the full title is. So it's just good information because you want to make it easier on your future self. You want to create a system in your notes in how you organize your photos so that you can find out the information, because there's nothing that's more frustrating than spending a long time and finding really good things and then it's just buried somewhere in your phone or on, in a Google Doc. So I found that, taking a photo of the cover of the book and then the following pages, and then if I'm, say I move on to a new book, then I do the same thing. So if I'm looking through my photos chronologically, I can figure out oh, okay, all right. So for the Silk Manual, I took the, photos of these 5 pages, and then I moved on to this next one. So this is the fun setup that you get to experience when you work with the older books. And honestly, I think that this is a really ergonomically comfortable setup with the newer books too. You know, I've used those kind of book stands, and I feel like a robot, you know, when I'm trying to look at the book itself and then type everything out. This is really nice because you have this kind of squishy pillow that you lay the book out on. You have these book weights that you can arrange, and sometimes they'll give you bigger ones so that you really don't have to mess around with pages. You can just focus on, you know, reading the information or transcribing it. You know, for me, I really like to write it verbatim. If I'm doing, you know, monographs, I'm gonna do direct quotes, and I'm gonna write the page number down. I'm gonna, you know, really kind of add extra little bits of information that stand out to me in that moment. And then, you know, I might end up with a document to write one single monograph. I might end up with a document that's like 25 pages of notes, you know, but, you know, as a researcher, that's for you, you know, that's information that you can utilize in lots of different ways. So if you're writing an article and then you end up teaching a class, then you can go and look through those raw notes to see if there's a different aspect of this particular topic that you're like, oh, I didn't even talk about that, you know, in my article that I wrote, but this is really amazing information. It's super interesting, and I can pull it out for this other project. So, you know, as independent herbalist researchers, we get to create our own libraries of information of what we feel like is really important. And so, you know, taking really good notes for yourself is a huge gift to your future self. So distance library use. So first and foremost, I would say check the digitized books first for information. So like I mentioned, it's a really small amount of books that are digitized. So you'll just go to the homepage and then go to research, and then it lists digital collections as a pop down. So you want to create a short list of sections of books to research. And same thing with before. You want to email the library and give them kind of a general scope of your project. And, you know, you could be reading in something totally different in a completely different journal, and they'll mention some texts, right? So this happened to me when I was doing graduate dissertation. I was in London. I was doing research on lavender and thyme and the Lamacy family, and I kept like reading about these particular books, and they couldn't find them at the library that I was at. And I was like, well, they're supposed to be here. I'm like, I don't know. Like, you guys, don't you guys keep all this stuff? Like, I don't understand. But the books were missing, you know, the journals were missing that I wanted to look at. And so I emailed the Lloyd and told them what I was looking for. I was like, hey, it's in this journal from like volume 17 of 1704, you know, do you have it? Because it looks like from looking online in the catalog that you do, you know, but I wanted to verify. And I mean, it was like less than a week that the librarian ended up scanning the photos for me, and she sent them right over. So it was a huge gift to be able to just have that information so readily available, because, you know, you can spend a lot of time trying to seek out these books, and you go down the rabbit hole of like, well, they're not here, like what library is close to me? I mean, WorldCat is a good resource. It can tell you if you're looking for a book, like what is the most geographically close library that you can find it at. You know, like maybe it's not in Cincinnati, but it's in Louisville, and like, do you want to go to Louisville and maybe have a day where you go hiking and like also go to the library and look at a book? I don't know, maybe. So WorldCat can be useful in that way. So when you are, you know, using the library, you know, from afar, you want to include really detailed descriptions of the citations. Like even if you can't find like the exact page, you know, but you know, like, okay, this author is talking about it in this publication or in this journal, you know, do you have access to this section? Then that can help them to research it. Because, you know, the more information you give the librarians, the better it is, because they're doing a lot of legwork. They're like literally walking up to the stacks, physically pulling things, but you know, they're great sleuthers, and so, you know, the more meat that you can give them, then it gives them more to go on. So scans, the first 25 pages of a scan is free, and then it's 25 cents per page. So, you know, just being mindful of, you know, what you're asking these amazing librarians to do. And then again, you always want to ask them for other useful additions or collections, books in the collection. So another good tip is incorporating Biodiversity Heritage Library into your search to broaden your net. So the Heritage Library is a worldwide consortium of botanical and natural history research and national libraries that offer open access to their collections. So it was previously headquarters at the Smithsonian, which, as you can guess, things are in transition a little. But I would just keep them on your radar, because eventually the dust will settle and we can reevaluate where things. But it's also a really great source for visuals. There's over 300,000 free images of the natural world. So if you're writing a monograph, or if you are, just doing botanical illustrations and you need to find something really specific, they're a great resource. And sometimes you'll look on the Lloyd catalog, and especially for the digitized collections, and then you'll realize that it's linked to the Biodiversity Heritage Library. So, it's even if you're looking on the Lloyd's catalog, you can still kind of inadvertently be linked to here. So potential uses for herbalists. This is just a smattering, so really just use your imagination about how you can use these incredible books. So one use is product formulation and extraction research. So these are a few excerpts from Scudder's Specific Diagnosis and Medication, which David Winston mentioned the other day. So the gentian, this is interesting. It talks about it being an excellent bitter, resembling hydrastis. A very fine preparation may be made by taking 5 parts of gentian and 1 part of podophyllum, which is May apple, also on the UPS list, FYI, of at-risk plants, and making a tincture by percolation using dilute alcohol. It's one of the most efficient remedies I've ever used in atony of the stomach and bowels with feeble or slow digestion. So, side note, May apple is at risk. So this was at a time in which it was used in practice in a different capacity than it typically is now. On UPS website, they have a listing for herbal analogs, which is a really cool document where you can kind of look at, okay, originally, I'm thinking about using Trillium, right? Because I want to create a supportive formula for uterine health, right? But Trillium is at risk, so what can I use instead? So it gives you some different options of things that can be sustainably grown, that can be cultivated easily, that are not disturbed. Maybe it's just that you're using the aerial part versus the root of something, so there's less plant disturbance. But it's a good thing to have on your radar. But especially when you're looking in these old books, because sometimes you're like, we don't use those plants in that way anymore. What can I do instead? So for valerian, so this is a good example of how the librarian really helped me the other day. So this symbol, which kind of looks like an overlapping 3 on top of itself, I was like, I have no idea what that means. And sure enough, he pulled out this book. It's King's American Dispensatory, and there were abbreviations in the back that, this is the exact same time. The book that he referenced was published around the same time. So it was so helpful to be able to be like, oh, that means ounces. I never would have known that. And then, the VIIJ, through further sleuthing, the Roman numerals were often used to describe basically numbers and dosage. And they apparently replaced the J for the last I. So we were not able to figure out what OJ stood for. And then GTT right here, that means Gutta, which is drop. And then so it says Gutta IJ to Gutta XX. So it's saying 2 to 20 drops. And that's 8 ounces of alcohol, 50%. So you gotta follow the crumbs, man. I mean, it's it's like you're putting on a set of glasses from a different era in pharmacology. But I thought that it was interesting in this one because the section on valerian, if anybody came to my plant walk yesterday, I talked about this a little bit. You know, here's a really old text, 1913, right? And they're talking about valerian being a cerebral stimulant and it being employed whenever a remedy of this character is indicated, allaying nervous irritability, pain, promotes rest, and favors sleep, where these conditions result from an enfeebled cerebral circulation. Best used in the treatment of chorea, which is jerky movements of muscles, so think like Parkinson's, associated with macrotes, which is another term for black cohosh. So you can see there's like 8 different kind of sticking points in this one document on the right, where you're like, what's that? Wait, what's that? Wait, what's that? So, you know, you have to spend some time with the text, you know, from these eras because they're really just using different nomenclature. But there's just really a wealth of knowledge in there. Yeah, okay. So this next book, I love this book. This is an incredible item to have in your apothecary. This is William Mansfield's Squibb's Atlas of Official Drugs. I have a copy here. It's not from the Lloyd, it's mine, don't worry. I didn't steal it. And this was published during a time in which microscopic identification was not very common. This same author has a few books on histology and looking at, you know, broken plant cells and how to identify them under the microscope. But this book is incredible. And it's made, you know, think about, you know, pharmacists were also botanists. People were bringing in raw material. They were processing this raw material into standard medicines, right? And so they had to be able to evaluate the quality and identification of the plants themselves, you know, really different role than pharmacists currently, right? So this is golden seal, which is also known as hydrastis. So another element of using these older books is getting familiar with the other terms that people used to call them, like macrotes, you know, like you would never guess that that's black cohosh. There's no allusion to any like Latin name or anything that would link it to it. You just kind of have to know. So that can sometimes be an element when you're doing your searches, is that you might be using our current term that we use to describe that plant, the current name, but you got to know the kind of older terms for it. So really good information in here about how the stems, the old stems look like seals, golden seal, right? And it's yellow in color because of the berberine. I've got this book up here, so if anybody wants to check it out afterwards, I think it's really a good one. But this was really helpful because I was working on specification sheets for FDA compliance and plant identification for a mid-sized herb company. So they were using the information that I would create with these books to, you know, so that their employees could kind of go through when they received plant material, that they could, like, it was a choose your own adventure where they'd be like, oh, square stem, okay, check, yeah, all right, the stem cracks cleanly, okay, great, yeah, check, check, check. You know, it smells this particular way, it tastes this particular way. And so it was a way that was totally legit for these herb companies to confirm that, or deny, you know, what the plant was that they had. So this information is unfortunately not very common in a lot of modern herb books, you know, and definitely not in the chemical analysis books, because folks have really kind of migrated over to that as being the gold standard, which, you know, I have lots of things to say about that, but that's a whole other lecture. Yeah, totally. But, you know, this was a time in which, like, you know, our hands as like trained pharmacists, we were the machine, you know, like we were the ones that were like, okay, like this matches what we think that it is, this smells a particular way, blah, 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 blah. You know, so these texts from this era, I think, are just super helpful for, you know, smaller companies that are not going to do chemical testing. It's too cost prohibitive. You know, also, if you're just, you know, doing plant ID education, this is another great way, because there's so many little like nuggets of information in here that are super helpful and can help your students to be more accurate in their plant identification. And when is that not a good thing, you know? So you can also use the library for specific topic research. So this was an herbal bundle class that I did in the garden about a month and a half ago. So, you know, I was using African American Herbalism by Lucretia Van Dyke and incorporating some of that information. And I had a couple of other sources that I was using to kind of lay out my monograph that I was going to use as a handout for the class. But I was like, I need some more text. I need some more like background information, because my intention was to really present information, specific examples about the long history of use of smoke for purification in lots of different cultures, beyond indigenous communities in the United States, looking at Celtic communities, South American communities, all over the place, really. So I had mentioned that topic to one of the librarians at the Lloyd and said, I'm just kind of stalled out on the info that I have. This is what I'm looking for. And he pulls this book out and he was like, Megan, if this isn't the perfect time for this book, like, I don't know when else it's gonna be the right time. And it was a wealth of information. And through this book, I'm writing a monograph right now on tobacco, and I bookmarked this in my brain. I was like, when I come back and write this tobacco monograph, I'm definitely going to use this book. So, you'll have this kind of experience with using the collections where you're going to find something and you think like, I'm going to come back to this at a different point. So botanical design, I wanted to give you some eye candy of just some of the awesome covers that are there. I mean, can we just make this into wallpaper? This is amazing. Just the ends of the books, like the gold embossing is so gorgeous. It's just, there was an era in the late 1800s, early 1900s where all of the books were just so beautiful. You're like, this is just like a chemistry book, but yet it still looks really appealing from the outside. So I love the design element. So, if you are a designer, if you are working on a rebranding project with your herb company, if you are an illustrator and you're trying to figure out different ways of, describing bloodroot. I mean, like, look at this incredible bloodroot over here on this children's book. The Reign of Law, A Tale of Kentucky Hemp Fields. Like, I want to know about Kentucky hemp fields. I didn't even know I needed to know that, The Wildflower Book for Young People, these like gorgeous mulleins. I mean, it's just, there's so many that are like that. And unfortunately, there's not like a search in the catalog for like beautiful font. But, that's really where you describe to the librarian, like, this is what I'm working on. I've picked out these books that are so notable. Do you have anything that's similar, that's in the same vein as these books that are really well known? So herbal branding and font research, I'm just thinking about this because I just did this with my company, because I did some custom tea tubes, and I really just spent a lot of time like looking at the overall like vibe of different herb companies, and who I liked and who I didn't, what stood out, and you could easily do something like this at the Lloyd Library too. I mean, just gorgeous, just so stunning. So, obviously, if you've spent some time over at the Lloyd with the current show, you understand that they carry a wealth of books that specifically highlight, texts for the natural medicine movement, like John Uri Lloyd, John King, Worcester Beach, John Scudder, and Rafinesque. Rafinesque book is really interesting if anybody gets a chance to spend some time with that. But they also carry, besides the eclectic book collection, they carry the complete run of eclectic medical journal. And the journals are super rich repositories of info. They don't have a lot of images, it's a lot of text. And so you've really got to do some like sleuthing there. But there's a lot of info that's in there. And sometimes you'll see, if you're really spending time with the text, is like, you'll really see like, oh, this was mentioned in the journals, and then we see this show up in the books, or vice versa. So it's interesting to pay attention to publication dates and also like who was communicating with who. Sometimes you find mistakes in which like one person repeated something and then somebody else repeated something, and maybe now we know that that's really not very accurate. So it's like a puzzle, just piecing it together. And then there's also plenty of papers from Pharmacognosys, boxes of things. And if you are poking around in the catalog and you find that they have text from somebody that you really admire, that you're curious about, you can request that. That's something that it's much easier to sort of dig through in person. But it is possible to, if you're really specific and describe your project, that they can also like look through certain things for you, and some of them are digitized. So the Lloyd Fellowships, there's great resources out for you all. So there's 2 fellowships, 2 different ones, and they have kind of different scopes. So the Artist in Residency Fellowship typically builds on an existing body of work. So there is a woman who specializes in like ceramic and design, and she did a project called Flourish. And so she had spent time in this large-scale warehouse that they would create replicas of old ceramics, right? And then she delved into this design element within the ceramic world, and then she was already kind of working on that idea, and then she started spending time at the Lloyd with her fellowship. And so she was able to kind of expand on what she had been doing in the ceramics field, but using the Lloyd collection. So Curtis Gates Lloyd Fellowship, that's what I have currently. So that often leads to something written or published. So it could be a documentary, just some sort of, there's some sort of culmination. And as part of the fellowship, you have to give a public talk. So it's a great way of letting the folks know in Cincinnati what you're working on. And then they also will record them and post them on YouTube. So it's fun to just poke around with some of the previous fellowship awardees, because you got a sense from like that short list that I shared, there's a lot of different applications, and there's different professional folks from lots of fields that come and do work there and on their fellowship. So notable past fellows include Susan Leopold and Abby Artemisia, as well as M. Cat Anderson. So there's typically 2 to 4 fellows that are selected each year. I think this year it's maybe a little bit more. And the stipend is $2,000 to $3,000 a month for up to 3 months. So if you're local, then that's $2,000 a month. If you're coming from afar, then it's $3,000 a month. So fellows must be on site for their research of 20 hours a week. So that's really a critical piece. Like, if you live afar, you want to think about like, when can I slip out of my life and spend 20 hours a week at the Lloyd for like a month or 2 months at a time. It's really nice when it's condensed too, because you really can get into a momentum that if it's spread out, it's harder to have that same momentum. So if you're doing a write-up, if you're creating like a ceramic piece, a textile piece afterwards, that's the culmination of your research, that's kind of time that's spent outside of the library. So that 20 hours is really just primary research using the collections. So successful applicants create projects that demonstrate that the Lloyd collections are central to their work and that they know how to do research. So, by demonstrating that you have spent time in the catalog, that you know what you want to at least start looking at, that's a really good sign. But you want to think about like, are the resources in the library itself, how are they crucial to you doing this project? Because there's lots of places that people can do botanical research. You could go to Mobot, you could go to Kew, you could go to, you could go out to UPS and work with Duke's collections there. But the Lloyd houses a specific set of texts, and how can those really enrich what you're doing? So my project is really fun. We're working on an herbal zine project. So if people went to the plant ID class yesterday, the plant walk in the Melrose Garden, the plants that I'm looking at in my monographs are ones that are grown there and are in the medicinal seed tube that I sell. So I'm working with local artist Julia Oquera Bianco, and she's a visual artist and performer. She spent time at UPS. We actually got connected through Chip Carroll, the plant steward, sanctuary steward out there, and he was like, I think you guys would really hit it off. And we shared an office for a little while here in the city, and are getting to work on this herb zine. So we just started just about a week ago, and we're going to be crafting an herbal zine about plants that flourish in the Ohio River Valley. So they don't have to necessarily be endemic to this area. One of the plants that I'm looking at is Tulsi. Tulsi is native to India. But we can grow it here as an annual, and I think that that's really good to be aware of because, we are so rich in our biodiversity in this region. You can tell from the eastern deciduous forest Materia medica, it's very rich, and that's a lot of what the eclectics end up talking about because there's so much that's here. But we can also grow things, from other places, and it lessens our carbon footprint if we consume those in our daily herbal practice or with our clients. So I'm going to be looking at tobacco, calendula, valerian, motherwort, tulsi, sage, and horehound. So topical medicinal use, cultivation methods, herb preparations, and conservation issues. And really the focus is highlighting eclectic medical texts and female botanist illustrators. So lots of women are in the herb world, for generations, but they don't necessarily get the clout that they deserve. Often it would be like a daughter that was doing illustrations for their scientist father. So they would be out doing field work with them, but then they couldn't necessarily get published on their own or, Beatrix Potter, which I love because I read her children's books growing up, she was a really, really skilled mycology illustrator. And she tried to get published and she couldn't. And so she redirected and did lots of other great things in her life. But, her illustrations really demonstrate that she was a keen observer of the natural world. And there's lots of other examples of that, specifically in the botany world. So the zine is up for pre-order on the website, and it's going to be released in early 2026. So there'll be a public talk here in Cincinnati for that, and I'm sure that that'll be recorded. But the zines are going to be the illustrations Julia's doing, and she does a lot of nature-based prints and cyanotypes, so sun prints, and that's an example of some of her work right now. She has an exhibit at the CAC right now. She just opened it up yesterday, and it's just a short walk from here. So if you have time, you should definitely check it out. And then different ways to stay in the herbal loop. So you can always visit my website, which is okatuherbals.com. You can sign up for the monthly herbal newsletter. I just give updates on kind of what I'm doing in different classes. And there's things that are happening here, but also further afield. And there's a sign-up sheet that's just right next to the door. And if you're on social media, I'm just on Instagram, and that's under Okatu Herbals. So thanks for your attention. Yeah. I'm happy to answer questions if folks have anything that they want some clarification on. Yeah. Oh, just wait 1 second. Go ahead.
I just had a question about other online sources. You mentioned I can't remember the name.
The Biodiversity Heritage Library?
Yes, I was wondering what other sources you suggest looking, because I'm doing research on a specific herb and just trying to look across the gamut. And some of the information might not necessarily be in one place.
Well, if you're looking for research-related things, you can check Sci-Hub for free articles. That's great. The website always is changing, so you have to just figure out where it currently is housed. I like Herbal Reality, which is a lot of good research that is done mostly by herbalists outside of the United States, and it's from a mostly British perspective. So I think that is useful to kind of, keep in mind because they're coming from a medical herbalist background. Sebastian Pohl, who's a lovely human and herbalist who started Pukka Tea, he is one of the founders of that. So that's a cool one. And you can I think that you could jump off from there. Does that answer your question? Yeah, cool. Yeah, you had a question?
Yeah, so I'm just wondering, I'm just trying to make sense of when it would be necessary to fly out versus calling in. So if I understood you correctly, if you have a few dozen pages and you know exactly the page numbers, 25 of those pages would be scanned for free, obviously, and above and beyond that. But if you can't ask for a whole book to get scanned, obviously. So is it just as long as you know what page numbers you're offering them, then you don't have to come? Or?
I would just talk to them. I would say that would be something that they would want to discuss with you about what you're looking for, and they might know of resources of things that are listed already online, or they could point you towards information that might be closer to you, that might be easier for you to access if it means traveling. But I mean, I think Cincinnati is a great city, and I'm sure you got a sense of kind of the bonuses of being here. So,
it's a great city.
yeah. So, I would say like talk to them about your project and kind of what you would like, and then they can be really realistic with you about what they can offer.
Thank you.
Yeah. Yeah, Alex.
Is next like above? I got a sense of the building, but
Yeah.
Okay, I didn't know if they had the whole building if there's just
Yeah. It's multiple floors all above. Yeah, they're doing a fundraising campaign right now, and then there's going to be a major renovation of the Lloyd down the road. So it's still going to have the same footprint, but I think that the stacks are always going to be separate as far as I know. But it might be like a little bit easier down the road to like understand like where they are, in the building, because it is. I'm like in the beginning, I thought, are they in the basement? Like, where are they? I don't understand. Are they just in the back behind that door that says staff only? Yeah.
Hi, so I understand that you have like a really large collection of more so archival research.
Yeah.
Do you have any like current pharmacognosy research or like herbal medicine research as well? And is that collected in the same way that like the archival research is?
Yeah, that would be a really good question for the archivist, because that is her specialty. Her name's Christine, and she's very helpful. There are a lot of current books, not just things that were published in like 1830. So some of those things that are on display that you might be talking about, they have a whole section of kind of current journals and their issues. But I would just say, email the library if there's anything in particular that you're looking for. And then you could always connect with Christine, and then she would be able to kind of, lead you further. Yeah, you're welcome. Yeah.
Have you personally explored stacks regarding cultivation history? And if so, do you have any fun things to share?
Cultivation history. I mean, somewhat on American ginseng. I think that UPS has kind of pulled out some really good gems. I think it was in the back of that combo small booklet that they did with Rural Action, where they publish, you can picture it, the section that's on American ginseng. But I thought that was really cool that there was, cultivated shade ginseng happening 100 years ago. And they also were talking about conservation issues back then. But that's the first thing that comes to mind. But check in with me in like 2 months, and I'll probably have a lot more to share about at least the 7 plants. Yeah.
So if you're interested in like, I don't know, a font or an image or a quote, and you want to use it like, I don't know, let's say for research, or if you have a supplement company and you want to reference something, like how does the copyright work?
Yeah, it's a good question. Yeah, so the older books are not going to be under copyright law, of course. But there's different rules around if it's a for-profit project versus nonprofit or educational. I'm not super up to date on the exact details of that, so that would definitely be a good question for the librarians. But they have, specific rules around that. And like I had written an article on the difference between all the different ginsengs and also Eleutherococcus for an herb company. And I used some of the images from the books, from the Lloyd, and they scanned them. And, so there was just like specific kind of things that we needed to do to be able to use those images because, I was the writer, but it was like a project that was like a blog post that was like going to be on another website. So yeah, but they can guide you through that process for sure. Yeah.
I was going to piggyback on her question. In the case of that ginseng publication, for example, would you credit the Lloyd Library as well somehow through that? Or?
Like if you were using it in publication yourself?
Or a product or something like that? It's probably case specific, but just curious how to bring credit that's due to the Lloyd Library.
I mean, I think that transparency is important in journalism as well as herbalism. Like I want to know where information's coming from. And, we want to like give homage to this incredible work that has happened before us. So I come at it from like that perspective of, you know, how can I like lift up these sources, lift up these authors, these teachers that have been so integral to, you know, my formulations or particular topics. And so I love being able to lift up the Lloyd, even though I'm not an employee of the Lloyd. You know, I'm an independent researcher that really gets to utilize the collections, and I feel like much richer for it. So I'm always like singing the praises of the library, and I think it's really sweet when it's, you know, woven into publication articles. And like there's in the Edible Ohio magazine that's out right now, there's a great write-up on UPS, and they talk about the symposium. They accidentally called Rosemary Gladstar Rosemary Morningstar, which I was like, is there another Rosemary? Oh no, it's just, yeah, the typo, yeah, no. But, you know, but they talked about the Lloyd, and I mean, you know, Edible Ohio, you know, it's a lot of foodies, yeah, thank you. It's a lot of foodies that are gonna be reading that, and they might not ever know about the Lloyd and think about it within like a food context. So I think anywhere that you can kind of like share that information about the Lloyd is great. Yeah. Yeah.
So you said 1% is digitally available?
Less than, yes.
Less than 1%?
Yeah.
Do they have all the titles listed, or many of the titles, or how would you know, even if you don't know specifically what book you're looking for, how would you even know what to search outside of what's digitized?
The catalog. Yes.
So it is in the catalog.
Yeah.
It's not the actual page, it's just the title of the book.
It kind of depends. I mean, yeah, it kind of depends. You can find a lot of things just by poking around, really. But yeah, you wanna utilize the catalog to do like, you know, like subject searches or author searches, and then yeah, you can look in the digitized collections that are there, and then if you kind of like run into a wall, then it's always great to email them, and they might just redirect you into a different part of the catalog that you maybe just didn't know about. So, or give you some search terms, and yeah. Well, I think, oh yeah, more questions? Yeah.
Have you been to the higher floors of the basement?
Oh yeah.
Can you describe it to us and give them the access?
It's filled with knowledge. I mean, they're like, so in the newer sections, they have the updated shelves that like crank so that you can kind of like tighten up the whole collection and maximize your space. And I think eventually down the road, the other stacks are going to be, you know, that type of shelving. Possibly, that's what I heard. But yeah, it's a lot of like super tall shelves, and they're all extremely organized. There's, you know, a rare books cage. So certain things that are really exceptional are housed under higher security. And yeah, it's kind of dim and quiet, and it's just like it's like a library cave. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I remember in 1997 when we had the AHG here,
Oh yeah.
that we were allowed to go down into the stacks at that point.
Yeah.
And Bill Black said, now be really careful if
Yeah.
you go into the rare books cage.
Yeah.
Put on these gloves.
Yeah.
And it was cotton gloves or something, it wasn't
Mhm.
plastic at that point. And he said, because these books literally, we don't know where they came from. They were probably used in the sick rooms of the plague, and we really don't know. If you could pick up something here, and we were also like, ooh, spooky. You know, that's very good. It was like, and you know, it just added to the flavor of the experience.
Yeah. Hopefully no one's gotten the plague. And that actually brings up a good point. So they don't have people put on gloves when they're working with the books.
Not
Even
anymore.
yeah, because the idea is that you have more tactile awareness of, you know, where your hands are. You're less likely to tear the pages, to fold things if you're, you know, have all your faculties about you. And that some of those cotton, you know, I mean, paper can be really delicate, and so like some of those
And
cotton
the plastic
gloves.
could rip it.
Yeah, and even cotton can be rough too sometimes. So it's, I mean, yeah, the first time I got to handle a book from the 1500s that was like barehanded, I was like, oh, all right. Yeah.
I'm just curious how much of, I don't know, in your perusing, how much of the herbs you're noticing, like, I'm just curious if there are herbs covered from like India or, you know, the Middle East or other places beyond like Europe and North America.
Yeah.
How much, what percentage or how much is in there?
Yeah, that would really be a good question for the librarians because they have a much deeper understanding of the full scope of the collections. I will say that I specifically asked about that the other day, and they said that the section, like the geographic section of the world that is least represented is South American in their collections. So, yeah, but that would be a good question for them, for sure. Yeah.
Are there any herbarium specimens in the Lloyd Library?
Not there, as far as I know, because you want to be really cautious about insect damage with the old books. So as far as I know, the herbarium section is downstairs. Oh, there's some. Yeah. Yeah. So the majority is over at UC. So I guess there are some downstairs, but I just haven't seen them. So, yeah. All right. Well, thanks so much.